This meeting of Norwood City Council is hereby called to order. Please rise for the prayer and the Pledge of Allegiance. Our Father, who art in heaven, is a body we congregate in these council chambers. We pray for thy divine guidance, that we may do all things well, according to thy holy will. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I would ask that you remain standing.
Sorry.
This past week, we lost two gentlemen. One has long-time connections to Norwood, and one that's just in the Cincinnati area, but tragic nonetheless. The first is Dave Query, who passed away last week. He was a teacher and a principal and ultimately superintendent of Norwood City Schools for many years, and his heart was always in Norwood, and he passed away. And while I was out of town, I was tragically reading or seeing on the news about Kyle Plush, who unfortunately passed away at Seven Hills. So if we could have a moment of silence for the loss of these two lives. Thank you. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson.
Present.
Mrs. Hannerhan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Breeden.
Yes.
All members are present. We do have a couple of amendments to the agenda. Under administration reports, there is a Tim Maloney about the earnings tax reports, and I would propose that we move that down to communication number 3. It's not really an administration report. So that would be communication number 3. And then we would add communication number 4 is a letter from Norwood City Council regarding Officer Harvey. It's the letter that we asked the clerk of council to write last week, and we'd like to read that on council floor. So those are the two requests we have to amend the agenda. Ms. Stevenson?
I move that we amend the agenda as read.
Seconded by Mrs. Hannerhan. Is there any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson.
Yes.
Mrs. Hannerhan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Breeden.
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Next, we have the minutes of the April the 10th, 2018 meeting. They were distributed by email and then on your desk. Mrs. Hannerhan?
Thank you, Madam President. I'd like to move that we defer acceptance of the minutes until the next meeting. There are multiple areas of clarification, and rather than go through discussion of all of them, I'd like to sit down with Mr. Gears and go through the audio and come up with the understanding of interpretation on a few items. I would also like to say you did a wonderful job on the minutes. Yes. They are long and detailed. But there are a few things I'd like to go over with you. Thank you.
Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Braden. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo.
No.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson.
Yes.
Mrs. Hannerhan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes.
Mr. Breeden.
Yes.
By a vote of 6 in favor and 1 against, the motion carries. So we will defer those to the next meeting. We do have one request to address council on agenda items, and that is Steve Verdon and Jim McGraw from Paycor. Would you like to come forward now? And it is on an agenda item, so that's why we are having them speak now. Welcome back, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Sure, you give us your name and...
I'm Jim McGraw with K&K Law Firm representing Paycor.
And I'm Steve Verdon with Paycor.
Okay. Ms. Stevenson?
Thank you, Madam President. In our last meeting, we had the first 2 readings of an ordinance allowing for an amendment to an agreement with Paycor, and I've asked that Mr. Verdon and Mr. McGraw come back and address us on a question that I posed, which was about the clause in the current agreement that has to do with the city hiring process and the referrals. And so they're going to give us an update on the existing goal and share some things that have been talked about since the last meeting.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you for the question
You're welcome.
and the opportunity to come back. So specifically in the agreement, there's a city residents hiring goal. And that goal is 10% of new hires in Paycor. So I had to do some data searching, search through zip codes and do some address searches through the websites to find the correct number. So currently, as of last week, there's 36 of our 991 employees that are Paycor or Norwood residents. And to come up with the math, the agreement was based on new hires, and in May of 2014, we started out with 538. So the math to me is 36 divided by 538, and it's 6.7%. In my letter, I rounded up to 7. So that's currently where we're at as far as specific hiring goals to that 10%. Obviously, it's not 10%. So I wanted to address, there's talk in the current agreement about city representatives working with Paycor. I think it's fair to say that both sides have somewhat fallen short on that. And to amend that, specifically, I've brought up a name within our organization. His name is Bill Neese. And Bill Neese is the Vice President of Talent Acquisition. So we have a few vice presidents. He's one of those, specifically in the Human Resources Department of our organization. So he's been designated the contact specifically to help bridge the gap, if not exceed the gap. And with regards to that, our chief of HR has brought up a few things that we'd like to do annually, and specifically an annual open house. We do open houses for new hires, but they're more of a general open house. Specifically, we want to have an open house for Norwood residents. So that's one thing we want to do. And to promote the open house, we're talking about advertising, specifically in Norwood papers, and other links and things that can be we can work with, again, Norwood's representative to figure out what's the best way to promote the event. Not only promote the event, just promoting the job availabilities within Paycor. We hire an extensive amount of people, considering we started 538 in Norwood, and now we're at 990. And obviously the letter is talking about 1,000 more hires. So we're excited about that. And the other thing that I think I mentioned in an email to Ms. Stevenson was continuing our visible touches to the community. We're supporters of the Norwood Police, the Norwood Parade, the Norwood Fireworks. We support Norwood schools to adopt the classes. We were supporting Norwood High School athletic departments and Norwood YMCA. So we look forward to continuing those corporate sponsorships. There's a flood of other things that we're involved in the greater community, but those are specifically Norwood related. So that's kind of a summation of I think the effort to really we need more employees, and obviously next door, and we do have we have a lot of employees that are, I'll say, outside of Norwood that are working in Paycor, and then they say, hey, why don't I live down the street? So that is happening. So is that yeah, sure.
Mrs. Hanrahan?
Just thank you for being here.
Sure.
We're very happy to have your company here in Norwood, and we're excited for your expansion. With that said, I just have a question. Can you tell me who you negotiated with the city for the terms of this new agreement?
Jim, you want to answer? Yes, sir.
Mayor Williams.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions, comments? Ms. Stevenson? I'm sorry. Mr. Bonsall, you had a question?
Yeah, thank you. And I'm not gonna going to get into a few semantics here just related to the hiring thing, but just know that what's happened in the past, it's fine. You know, I'm really appreciative of the how we're going forward. I just want to make sure that we're measuring it correctly going forward. So there's two things that, like when you say that you had 538 positions that were here when you moved, that you already had when you moved here,
Correct.
or that were moved into the city, have any of those positions been, like, have any of those people left the company where you've had to rehire people into it? I guess I'm just curious, should the number truly be 538, or should 538 truly be the number that we're discounting at this point, because some of those people would have left since they come and you would have had to refill the positions?
I think it's hard for me to say no or yes to your question, because yes, there's been, obviously, not every person who started with Paycor has been there for this duration since 2014. It's the best data I can provide you. So.
And that's totally fine. Like I said, I'm not worried too much about the past. I just want to make sure that if we can try to think about that for the future when we're measuring this. And the same thing with like the 36 employees. Were any of those employees before you actually moved into Norwood, in the sense that were any of those people hired before you moved here? So would they still count, or like would they be in the part that we've already excluded, if you will? So
I think again, I think you would be. I think you're correct in saying that if 36 were here, that's not a fair number, because it wasn't growth.
Gotcha.
From 538 to 990.
So just things to think about, like when we're trying to calculate that for the future, it's going to have less of an effect as we move on, because more of these employees will have been hired since you all moved here. So it makes sense there, and I do just want to express appreciation that you all have been willing to work with Ms. Stevenson, and thank you to Ms. Stevenson as well for bringing this up. I think this is going to be great, and just really good opportunities for residents, so they can not just see these wonderful buildings, but they might actually have a chance to work in one of them. So.
Well, it's not only that, but with our state of Ohio request, the average salary of a Paycor associate is $70,000. So obviously there's people that make more and people make less, but I was looking up some numbers. 23% of our associates here in Norwood are product and IT project or jobs. So those are obviously lots of jobs, and we need to hire lots of product and IT folks. So, not to mention client service and other general administrative folks throughout the organization.
Excellent.
Ms. Stevenson.
Thank you. Again, thank you for coming back. I was not a part of the council that signed off on the original agreement, and so even though this was there and wasn't altered with the amendment, it's helpful to know kind of what's been going on, and I'm really excited to be aware to help champion it as well. I really like what you've laid out in terms of helping us know who the contact is, as well as pursuing local efforts around advertising and the open house. I think you said it's 23% of the new jobs that are still coming are IT?
I'm saying of our current job mix,
Got it.
23% of them are IT related fields.
It's exciting to be able to think forward about ways we can create career paths and or just be thinking about how we market the type of job opportunities here. In some conversation with Mr. Moore, I realized that the city had not appointed a person to work on the clause with Paycor. And so I have shared with Mr. Moore, I'd like to talk with him more about becoming that person, so that questions about numbers, like how are we measuring, what are we doing, are we making sure it's getting done, it stays updated, and there's someone on the city side able to connect with Mr. Neese and HR as needed. So I just want to say thank you again. I'm glad you were able to come back, glad you were able to do the research. I'm glad to hear we've got 36 folks and hopefully more as you continue to grow.
Sure.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Any other questions or comments?
Thank you.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. We have no reports of standing committees of council, so we will move on to third reading of ordinances, and that is an ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into the First Amendment to the Property Investment Reimbursement Agreement with Paycor, Inc., and declaring an emergency. Mr. Bonsall.
I move that we have the third reading of the ordinance.
Is there, seconded by Ms. Stevenson. Is there any discussion? Mr. Thompson.
I just wanted to let everybody know, for personal business reasons, I will be recusing myself from the vote on this today.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson.
Thank you.
Appreciate you telling us that in advance. Any other discussion? The motion on the floor is to have the third reading. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzall.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson.
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries with one abstention. Have the third reading, please.
Ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into the First Amendment to the Property Investment Reimbursement Agreement with Paycor, Inc. and declaring an emergency.
Motion to pass. Mr. Bonsall.
Thank you, Madam President. I move that we pass the ordinance.
Seconded by Mr. Braden. Is there any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzall.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson.
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
Yes.
By a vote of 6 yes and 1 abstention, the motion passes. You're very welcome, sir. Next is introductory reading of ordinances, and that is an ordinance authorizing the Service Safety Director to enter into a collective bargaining agreement with the Bargaining Committee of the Norwood, Ohio Police Division for the period from December 1, 2015 through November 30th, 2018, and declaring an emergency. Mr. Bonsall.
Thank you, Madam President. I move that we have all three readings of the ordinance.
Seconded by Mr. Thompson. Is there any discussion? Mr. Bonsall.
Thank you, Madam President. So the reason why we need to have all three readings today is just so that we can get this collective bargaining agreement into service. It's all based on a fact-finding report that came out in both the city and the bargaining unit did not object to the findings in the report, so it became active after 7 days. But now this ordinance allows us to take that active agreement and actually put it into an official collective bargaining agreement so that we can take certain actions that the city needs to take to fulfill the obligations.
And would you clarify that these, all the terms of this agreement are in the financial recovery plan as we passed?
That is, yes, thank you, Madam President. So yes, the Finance Committee did make sure that fact-finding, all the things in the fact-finding report were in the fiscal recovery plan.
Thank you, Mr. Bonsall.
Thank you.
Ms. Stevenson.
I do have a question, just recalling we are in discussion. As I read through, I noticed that there were a couple of places where days were described differently. And I'm wondering if Mr. Moore or anyone else has insight into, was that just an oversight? There's the phrase working days, there's calendar days, and then there are just days. And I'm just curious
Mr. Moore.
Clarity about that.
There we go.
Thank you, Madam President. The collective bargaining agreement that is attached to this, the idea was that we had the fact-finding report, and in order to avoid, say, 2 months from now or 3 months from now, the union and the city disagreeing on exactly what the operative effect of the fact-finders report would be to get, okay, we're going to agree on language, so moving forward, we're all on the same page as we, through the end of the year, which is when this ends, and while negotiations are going on. The day, as I recall, the fact-finders report didn't have anything that involved operative days. And so that's legacy. I may be wrong, but I mean, the bulk of what's here is legacy language, and I'll just say that there are different definitions of different days for different purposes. There are a lot of things in these agreements that are kind of not consistent, not internally consistent, because different things were added at different times and addressed different issues. And so all this is meant to do is to kind of formalize the fact-finders report, the handful of things that came out of the fact-finders report, and put them in language that is more applicable to the way the collective bargaining agreement works.
Follow up, Ms. Stevenson?
Yes, thank you. That is helpful. I'm aware that we're formalizing the document. When I was aware of this before, I didn't catch that discrepancy. There is a definition of working days, and I think calendar days is clear, but there are some call-outs with a new number and simply the word days. And I hear you explaining that's just legacy language at this point.
Correct.
Thank you for that clarity.
I would suggest that if you have any suggestions, you may want to let the mayor or the safety service director know of those concerns. In the past, when I was a department head, there were mayors who asked us to go through the collective bargaining agreements and that we were affected by and offered language changes and things. So if you have some language changes that you think might be applicable, I would think that would be a good suggestion to make to either the mayor or the safety service director.
Thank you.
Is there any other discussion? The motion on the floor is to suspend the rules and have all three readings. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan?
Yes.
Mr. Sanker?
Yes.
Mr. Breeden?
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Please have all three readings.
Ordinance authorizing the Service Safety Director to enter into a collective bargaining agreement with the bargaining committee of the Norwood, Ohio Police Division for the period from December 1st, 2015 through November 30th, 2018, and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the Service Safety Director to enter into a collective bargaining agreement with the bargaining committee of the Norwood, Ohio Police Division for the period from December 1st, 2015 through November 30th, 2018, and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the Service Safety Director to enter into a collective bargaining agreement with the bargaining committee of the Norwood, Ohio Police Division for the period from December 1st, 2015 through November 30th, 2018, and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Bonso,
Thank you, Madam President. I would move that the ordinance be passed.
seconded by Mrs. Hanahan. Is there any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mrs. Stevenson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan?
Yes.
Mr. Sanker?
Yes.
Mr. Breeden?
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. We'll move on to introductory readings of resolutions. And it is a resolution authorizing an agreement with Great Lakes Recycling, Inc., DBA Simple Recycling. Mr. Bonso,
Thank you, Madam President. I would move that we have the first reading of the resolution.
seconded by Mr. Thompson. Is there any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan?
Yes.
Mr. Sanker?
Yes.
Mr. Breeden?
Yes, sir.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Please have the first reading.
A resolution authorizing an agreement with Great Lakes Recycling, Inc., DBA Simple Recycling.
We have no administration reports nor other requests to address council, so we will move on to unfinished business. Is there any unfinished business? I would like to address last meeting. I think I gave you a red line version of the retirees' health care plan. I don't know if there are any comments back, if we need to have a committee meeting, or if we can just proceed. I didn't hear from anyone, but I didn't know if we could just proceed. I know the law department has prepared an ordinance adopting that when we are ready to do it. So I just want to follow up and see if anyone has any changes to the red line version that was sent out and handed to you all last meeting.
Madam President?
Yes, Mr. Moore.
I'd just like to clarify, I haven't actually prepared the ordinance
Oh.
that incorporates changes to that,
Okay.
to the notice, but
But you're on notice, and yeah,
I'm-
we spoke about it, so it'll be ready to go if we need it. Thank you. Mr. Bonso?
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. I have reviewed the document. I don't see any changes that necessarily that need to be made that we haven't already talked about in prior meetings, and I'm looking forward to considering it at our next meeting.
Is the consensus that we move forward with the preparation of the ordinance and consideration at the next meeting? Ms. Stevenson?
Thank you. I'm in agreement with that. One point of clarity, though, we had discussed some timelines around notification and adoption. Did that need to be a part of the plan, or was that just needing to be a part of the ordinance?
That, I adapted those changes. I made those changes into the red line version, so it's already in there.
Okay.
I think we moved it from November to September the 30th, and that just says the latest. It has to be done by then, and it's...
I did not recognize that.
If you all approve it, I think that we will be moving quickly to get that done as quickly, as soon as we can, to let folks know. So if there's no objection, then we'll ask Mr. Moore if you can prepare that for the next meeting, the ordinance, and it'll appear on the agenda. Thank you. Any other unfinished business? Mr. Sanker?
Question, Madam President. The assembly of the park equipment down at Northwoods Park, when is that scheduled?
June the 2nd, from 9 until 5. I'd like to announce that there will be all the, thanks for asking, Indian Mound Cafe has agreed to provide lunch, a barbecue and coleslaw and mac and cheese, and Klosterman's will be donating buns for that. La Rosa's has volunteered to bring us pizza, but we'll have food and drinks and all that all day long. Andy Bolts will be a DJ that day, so it'll be fun. We had hoped to get one of the high school students to do it, but he's going to be on vacation, and so Andy, probably one of my ex-friends, I have a lot of ex-friends, I keep asking them to do things, and so when they see me, they run. But Andy Bolts is a friend of mine, and he agreed to do it for us in the other person's place. So again, all of the holes will be dug and the equipment will be there, the tools will be there. We just need to show up and put it together and mix concrete and do all that stuff. Public Works will be taking out the 2 pieces of equipment. I did speak to Mr. Tepe last week, and they're preparing to take those 2 older pieces of equipment out, and then everything will get curbs around it with mulch. So I think we have, if people want to volunteer, Children's has asked that they kind of be the central repository as opposed to notifying me. And so if anyone wants to volunteer, the number to call is 636-3153. That is Dawn Gardner. She is the person down at Cincinnati Children's who will be heading up that. She'll be coordinating all the activities that day. So again, that's 636-3153. And Boy Scouts will be helping us out. They've already committed, and last time I looked, there were about 25 people who had contacted Ms. Gardner. There were a lot more who were on the webpage on Facebook who said they were going to be there, and appreciative of the article in the newspaper as well. So hopefully it'll go well and go quickly. Thank you for asking. I happened to bring a flyer. So. Any other unfinished business? Mr. Bonsa.
Thank you, Madam President. So at previous council meetings and finance committee meetings, we've talked about the PACE telecommunications and council's desire to have future funds, 2018 and on funds from Cincinnati Bell go to PACE to help support their programming and the great stuff they do for the community. So the auditor's office, and just kind of, making sure that everything's on the up and ups, they would like to have a letter from council just stating that desire, that we would like to have the Cincinnati Bell cable television revenues go into Fund 16, our PACE fund. So I would like to make a motion that we request the clerk of council to send a letter to the auditor's office expressing that it is the intention of council to have Cincinnati Bell cable television revenue go into Fund 16, the PACE telecommunications fund.
Is there seconded by Ms. Stevenson? Is there any discussion? Ms. Hanrahan.
Would we want to consider putting not just Cincinnati Bell, but future franchise fees in there from others so that we don't run into the same issue we've already run into?
Mr. Moore? Like, say there's a new company that comes out and does cable.
It's entirely up to council. As part of this letter, I don't know. The auditor's office may remember 3 years from now. If that's what council wants to do, you could certainly include it in this letter. At the point that if another company starts offering these and paying franchise fees, then whether it ends up in there or not is something whoever's on finance committee is going to just have to keep an eye out. Does something show up as, I don't know, pick the name of AT&T franchise fee that comes through? I don't know. So,
just as a matter of reference, I asked the law department, I had sent an email about codifying those payments, maybe perhaps that we might need an ordinance regarding that, but also that perhaps we needed to look at the franchise agreement because it's very, very old. So I don't know if that's something, so when I sent the email, Mr. Gary said, we'll be happy to do that, but give us parameters, tell us how you want us to note this franchise agreement. So I sit on the PACE board as president of council. I'm automatically a member of the board. If you would like for us, I guess I'm looking for some guidance to see if maybe you want to do that, if you want to redo the agreement, and who you would want to represent the city or to sit down with them to come up with a reasonable agreement that might be applicable to today, because the other one is quite, I think it's from the 80s or 90s, it may be from 1990. Things have changed in 28 years. Mr. Bonsall?
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. I just have a question to the law director through the chair, if you don't mind. When we have a new provider come in to offer television services and they want to use our right-of-ways, and that's what the franchise fee is for, is, the lines hanging over our, property, if you will. Does council have to approve that, like a franchise agreement with them, or does state law allow them to kind of come in and just do it without our agreement and just pay us a fee?
Mr. Moore?
Thank you, Madam President. That actually was the question when we first heard, the law department was first contacted by PACE, was, okay, let's dig into this. And the way things have changed, there's not an agreement that's done, nor it has an ordinance that imposes a particular fee. And so the provider is required to send a letter to the city notifying the city that they will be that we will be conducting this. And then the city has so long to let them know that, oh, by the way, we have an ordinance that says you have to pay the fee. And since we're going back so many years, there's a question, did anybody send that letter? So in theory, yes. But that's one of those, yes, they have to send a notice to the city that they're going to do that. It's just the way things are at any large organization. When a letter comes in, you hope the right person sees it. So in theory, yes. So yeah, they would have to send us a notice, but we don't have to work out an agreement with every new provider that may come in. We have an ordinance in place that imposes the fee. And if I could just offer a suggestion, it might be if the PACE board has things they would like to see changed or updated, it might be the best place to start might be for the board to present what they would like to see changed to the law department or to council or to the administration. I would guess that most of council, I certainly don't, but the council members of council and likely nobody in the administration really has any clue what would actually be of use to the PACE board, what they would need or what would be helpful to them. So,
Mrs. Hanrahan?
Thank you, Madam President. The reason I bring that up is at this time in the agreement we have with them, there's so many council meetings they cover, so many, and we haven't followed that. And they've been great about coming to everything we ask them to, absolutely wonderful. But they're also working for the schools and for and they have a lot of different things. And I just think for everybody, we need to get what they're supposed to be doing clarified for them.
Thank you, Mrs. Hanrahan. Mr. Bonsall?
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. Yeah, when we talk about, any future revenues or where they might come from, me as a council member, when I approach my job, I very much try to always think about, what am I doing now that might, maybe unnecessarily bind a future elected official, because I won't be here forever, so a future elected official that's trying to do their job. So I guess I would just say that I am completely okay right now with the Cincinnati Bell cable television revenue going to PACE, because, and I'm okay that we're allocating it there. I don't know if I want to bind the city into always having to put those funds there, or at least not without some kind of a clause saying that we can dissolve that agreement in the future, because it could be maybe these revenues like triple in the future. The cable television revenues in most cities, they go straight into a city's general fund. So for us, it's different because we have a television service that we're kind of providing. And so we've decided that those funds should go there. I think the city of Cincinnati probably has something similar for their city cable that they operate. But I just want to make sure that we are not committing, because we just don't know what those numbers are going to be. I'm just making sure we're not committing funds that for other cities go into the general fund, and especially if those funds might grow in the future to something that's, that we don't expect today, which would be great for PACE, but maybe that's not necessarily the best place to allocate those funds. So I guess I don't know if we need to get a new agreement, but if we do get a new agreement, I would at least like to see, I do agree with Mrs. Hanrahan that we should clarify kind of what our expectations are. Like we want them to be at Norwood, the Norwood Day at Coney. We want them to be at the parade, whatever those things are that need to make sure that they're in there. I'd make sure that we should make sure those are in there as well.
Thank you, Mr. Bunzel. Any other discussion? So the motion on the floor is to have the clerk of council draft a letter to the auditor's office indicating council's desire that any franchise fees from Cincinnati Bell be deposited into Fund 16 for the purpose of going to PACE. Mr. Braden?
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm seconding.
Oh, I'm sorry. We already had the motion and the second.
But thank you, though.
You got
But thank you.
Great work.
Any other discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hanrahan?
Yes.
Mr. Senker?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Braden?
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Any other unfinished business? Ms. Stevenson?
Yes. I stand by my vote just now. I do have a question, and it's with regard, I appreciate both my fellow council members' comments. That is helpful to hear your perspectives. The letter is with regard to our current agreement. This does not preclude the other conversation we were just having about potentially hearing from the PACE board what modifications to the agreement might be helpful. And I just wanted to make sure that was clear.
And I can follow up with them at our next meeting. We meet quarterly, so I'd be happy to follow up with them. They probably will say, well, maybe we need to sit down. There's no lawyers on their board. Well, we could maybe come up with some suggestions, but yeah, I'll be happy to relay that to the PACE board to let them know. Thank you, Ms. Stevenson. Any other unfinished business? We'll move on to new business. Any new business? Ms. Hanrahan?
Thank you, Madam President. I had the wonderful opportunity of spending several hours with Councilman Braden, and we visited a lot of the properties, the vacant properties the city has. And since that's been done, I would like to schedule a health and housing meeting to discuss this, and was wondering if my fellow people here were available next Monday or Tuesday. That would be April the 30th or May the 1st.
April.
Sure, yeah.
Either of those?
I could do Monday.
Monday's better? Mr. Senko, is that work for you?
Maybe for a short time.
I don't think, yeah. Okay. What's a good time for you then? 6?
Just we have tear down up at the hall there, so.
Oh, well, I can do it Wednesday or Thursday. I can do it a different day.
No, I mean, if that works for everybody else, I can be there for another.
Okay. What time works for you? 6?
We can do that.
6 o'clock? Next Monday.
So April the 30th at 6 p.m.
Yes.
here in council chambers?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Hanrahan. Ms. Stevenson?
Thank you, Madam President. I'd like to call council members' attention to the upcoming first Thursday, potentially holding another Economic Development Community Engagement Committee meeting at 7 p.m. That would be Thursday, May 3rd. We've typically been meeting on first Thursdays. Does that work for fellow committee members?
Yes, ma'am.
We'll go ahead.
Mr. Ponsel, that work for you? Okay.
Yes.
So Economic
Development
and Community Engagement on Thursday,
May 3rd.
May 3rd,
To
At-
discuss 7 p.m.
7 p.m. here in council.
That's correct.
And do you know what the agenda item might be?
Yes, it'll be our committee goals.
Got that? Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other new business? Mr. Bonso?
Thank you, Madam President. So I wanted to draw attention, which as I've done the past 2 years when this has happened, to the upcoming High Five Parade that's going to be held in West Norwood. It's going to be hosted by Woven Oak Initiatives, their Friday Fun Life. And this thing is going to happen on this Saturday, the 28th, from 11 to 1. It's going to start at Carter and Mills, and there's like a 1.5 mile kind of parade route they go through West Norwood, and then they'll end back at Carter and Mills and have like some activities and food and stuff like that. The previous 2 years, the police department's been engaged. Ron Murphy's, helped lead the way to ensure that everybody is safe, and it's always just been a really great experience, not only for the residents but for the kids that get a chance to be involved. They blow up balloons, they've got noisemakers, and they just basically kind of spread cheer, joy and cheer like a big high five. So it's a great event. So anybody, whether you have kids or not, are welcome to join us 11 a.m. This Saturday at Carter and Mills. It's open to anybody.
Thank you, Mr. Bonso. Mrs. Hanrahan?
Thank you, Madam President. I just want to remind everybody of the citywide yard sale, May 11th and 12th. We will have another council meeting before that. But if you have any unwanted goods, you can take them to the community center the week of May 7th and donate them to the seniors who use this money to run their programs. They have a wonderful, wonderful garage sale every year. I always look forward to going. And you can call, and Donna, I don't know the number off the top of my head, to find out when somebody can be there for pickup.
458-4635.
458-4635
is the senior
But
center.
that's the week of May the 7th. Take your sellable items. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Hanrahan. Mr. Sanker?
Yeah, a follow-up on that. I'm pretty sure in the past there was no clothing
I think you're right.
down there.
I think you're right, Mr. Sanker. Any other new business? Mr. Bonso?
Thank you so much, Madam President. So as we had the moment of silence for Mr. Kyle Plush at the beginning of the meeting, I did want to let residents know that I reached out to the head of, or the officer that's kind of in charge of the dispatch center, and just to make sure that there's processes in place that we have that wouldn't allow what would happen to Mr. Plush, and that he assured me that we are, that Norwood there's two great things. We've got all of the benefits of a big 911 center. We have the technology to track phones. If for some reason your phone location doesn't come through and we need to know where your phone is, we have a very easy way that we can request it through cell phone companies, just being a dispatch center. And we can have them ping the phone and find out where the phone is as well. And as well, we have the benefits of being a small dispatch center because the people that are taking the calls are also right next to the people that are dispatching the officers. And so the communication and the can be much more free-flowing in some kind of an urgent emergency like that. Whereas in other communities, they have to kind of type it out into a computer system, and then it's got to get sent over, and then that dispatcher then has to communicate it. Here, for some kind of an urgent crisis like that, but there's much closer lines of communication. And just being in a small city, the fact that we have 3 square miles, when, if somebody were to give a location, even using like some kind of a slang type location that's not like an official full name, many of the dispatchers that work here, they also live here, and so they're going to know where these things are. So I just wanted to reassure residents that, things have been checked even since then. There's been some diagnostic stuff done that, they can just feel confident when they call 911. I've had a few people reach out to me concerned about that, and the dispatch center's here, it's ready for you, and it's really staffed by great people. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bonso. As a follow-up to Officer Buchanan, I had no idea that if you're on vacation, you could notify the police department, and we left for vacation the very next day. I filled out the application online. I have a system in my house where I can see the police officer twice a day walking around my house. It's an amazing service, so if people don't know about it, I would encourage you to call the police department if you are going on vacation. It's just a really nice service to have. One of the many benefits of having our own police department in a small town, so echo those gratefulness, Mr. Bonsall. Any other new business? Okay, we'll move on to communications. The first is a letter from Jerry Stoker regarding a public hearing regarding Market Garden.
To Norwood City Council. On April 4th, 2018, the Planning Commission voted unanimously to recommend to City Council the following text amendment: for Market Garden be denied, and for City Council to schedule a public hearing for possible adoption or denial of the text amendment. Market gardens are not currently a permitted use in the City of Norwood. The applicant is requesting 2 modifications. A market garden definition be added that reads, "Market garden, a site operated and maintained by an individual, organization, or business in cultivating, growing, harvesting of herbs, vegetables, and fruits for sale, allowing market gardens as a permitted or conditional use in residential zones or R2 specifically." If you have any questions concerning the above, please do not hesitate to contact me. Jerry Stoker, Building Commissioner.
We do have to give 30-day notice for the public hearing, so my suggestion would be to give the clerk time. That way, perhaps schedule the public hearing for June the 12th, if that's your desire. That gives them the month of May to get the list of people we need to notify, or to get it in the newspaper and then give a 30-day notice, because I don't think we can get it done by the 22nd of May. So June the 12th would be the earliest. I think we should potentially schedule that public hearing. Ms. Stevenson?
Thank you. Would this require us just notifying the property owners in that area, or is this just to the public noticing?
I think it's a public notice, since it would involve a change to the zoning code, so there's not a specific area. It's listing everything in residential zones or R2. So I think just a public notification. I don't know of anything specific, but just to be sure, I think the clerk's office always checks with the building department and law department to make sure that we're doing it correctly, the correct people are being notified. So there's nobody specifically that since it involves a zone change for the whole city.
That's correct. It was one particular property owner, but they were requesting that we change the zoning code applicable to all residential areas.
Yeah. So unless you think you can get it done, today's the 24th, can you get it advertised in time for the 22nd? Probably not.
That's less than
Yeah, it's not possible.
Right.
So it has to be June the 12th is the earliest we could potentially do it. Because even if it's a notification in the newspaper, it still has to be 30 days. Mr. Bonsall?
Thank you, Madam President. Yeah, I'm fine with the June the 12th. I'm curious though, I mean, it looks like we might have received this earlier in the month. I'm not sure when. I see the date says April 5th. I don't know if that's when the clerk of council received it, but
This is,
Go ahead.
she has it noted on here, received April 18th.
April 18th. Okay. So, even then, I'd potentially like to make a motion if there's no objections. When we receive these things, we almost always schedule the public hearing at one of the next available dates. Or at the next available council meeting that's not less than 30 days out. I can't think of a scenario where we haven't. So I would like to make a motion, which I will. I'm going to make a motion that when the clerk of council receives these, that they go ahead and schedule when they receive a zoning change or anything from the building department, they go ahead and schedule the public hearing 30 days out and send out the notice for that next available council meeting.
Is there a second to that motion? Hearing none, that motion would fail. Ms. Stevenson?
I have a question. Mr. Bonsall.
Yep.
Are you making that suggestion out of consideration for the requester?
Mr. Bonsall?
Yeah, no, not for this requester at all, because we can't change it here. But in general, like, I just think that we should try to figure out ways to speed up government. And so
Okay.
we literally are delayed, like, we could have done this in the last meeting in May, if we would have scheduled it when we originally received the notice. So I just truly think it's a government efficiency thing, and we should try to do these things in a better manner.
Thank you for that clarity.
Thank you, Mr. Bonsall. So we have the letter in front of us. What is your pleasure with the letter? Ms. Stevenson?
Madam President, with that clarity from Mr. Bonsall, if you'd like to make his motion again, I'd like to second it.
Would you like to make your motion again?
I would like to make that motion again.
First of all, can we deal with the letter?
We can. Yep, that's fine.
Well, let's go ahead and, if you want to, let's do yours. Your motion then is to
Yep, so I'd like to
restate it, please.
Yes, I would like to move that when we receive a request to hold a public hearing from the building department, that that the clerk of council is authorized to schedule that for the next council meeting that's at least 30 days out from the time they receive the request.
Within the confines of them getting the notifications out.
Yes, yes.
Is there a second to that? Second by Ms. Stevenson. Is there any discussion? Mr. Thompson?
I think it's an okay idea. I wonder, and this is just hypothetically speaking, if we have a situation where we get a note or we get a letter about something like this, sketching a public hearing, and for whatever reason, during this discussion we're having right now about the letter, we might not want to have a public hearing scheduled for it. So by automatically doing it, that takes power away from us in determining specifically when we want to address something. So understanding completely that we might want to keep things moving and speed up. I just want to throw that caution out there that if we make it automatic, if there's something that we don't like about it or something that we feel is wrong about it, if the meeting has already been scheduled and posted, there's nothing we can do about it.
Just to be clear, when the Planning Commission makes a recommendation, then we're required by law to have the public hearing. We
Right, I
can either
understand that.
approve it or we can disapprove it, but we are required to have the public hearing.
Okay. Well,
Yeah. Is there any other discussion? So the motion on the floor then is to give authority to the clerk of council to schedule, once a notification is received that requires a public hearing, that they be authorized to schedule the public hearing at least 30 days in advance after they have, that they will be able to schedule it within the confines of them notifying people and having it at least 30 days out. Is there any other discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
yes.
Ms. Stevenson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan?
No.
Mr. Sanker?
No.
Mr. Breeden?
No.
By a vote of 4-3, the motion carries. We still have the letter before us. Ms. Stevenson,
I think we need to I'm going to move to that we receive and file the letter.
and set the date of the public hearing
Yes, and set the date of the public hearing.
for June the 12th.
Yes, that did work for me, June 12th.
Seconded by Mr. Bonsall. Is there any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan?
Yes.
Mr. Sanker?
Yes.
Mr. Breeden?
Yes, sir.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Move on to a letter from the Bureau of Fire Safety regarding referrals sent to the Health Department.
Attached, please find a list of referrals sent to the Health Department for the month of March 2018 from the Bureau of Fire Safety. Sincerely, Nancy Allen, Clerk, Bureau of Fire Safety, Norwood Fire Department.
Mr. Clark?
Move that the letter be received and filed.
Seconded by Mr. Brayton. Is there any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan?
Yes.
Mr. Sanker?
Yes.
Mr. Breeden?
Yes, sir.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Next is a letter from Tim Maloney regarding earnings tax reports for February and March 2018.
Dear council members, attached are the monthly reports for February and March 2018. Should you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. Thank you. Tim Maloney, Treasurer, City of Norwood.
Mrs. Hanahan.
I move the letter be received and filed.
Seconded by Mr. Braden. Is there any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan?
Yes.
Mr. Sanker?
Yes.
Mr. Breeden?
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Next is a letter from the City Council regarding Officer Harvey.
Dear Officer Harvey, at the Norwood City Council meeting that took place on Tuesday, April 10th, 2018, Sergeant Buchanan announced that you are a recipient of MAD's Award of Excellence, which recognizes individuals like yourself who have made a significant impact in their respective communities to stop impaired driving. The core values of the Norwood Police Department include integrity, pride, respect, professionalism, and commitment. We can only assume that being presented with this award also reflects one or more of these values. It is our honor to formally recognize your contributions to the city and the citizens of Norwood, and to also congratulate you on being a recipient of MAD's Award of Excellence. As elected representatives of the City of Norwood, we thank you for your continued service, for your dedication, and for your concern of those visiting, working, and living in our community. Sincerely, and it is signed by all members of council.
Mr. Bonso.
Thank you, Madam President. I would move that the letter be received and filed, and the original, or copy of it be received and filed, and the original sent to Officer Harvey.
Seconded by Ms. Stevenson. Is there any discussion? Thank you for writing that, Mr. Beers. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan?
Yes.
Mr. Sanker?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Breeden?
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. We have no absent members. Mr. Braden.
I'll move we adjourn.
Seconded by Mr. Thompson. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan?
Yes.
Mr. Sanker?
Yes.
Mr. Breeden?
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. This meeting is hereby adjourned.